Greetings from Tank. This is Andrew Aiello, the General Manager. We have some very important information that we want to share with you as fiscal court members, but at the same time we know that you're very busy. So we're going to try something new. We have a video here that will hopefully provide some clear and concise information and hopefully get you up to speed on this very important issue. Today we're going to talk about the fiscal 2012 fare increase proposal. I'll begin with a little bit of context. In the spring of 2011, as you know, I was visiting each of the fiscal courts to talk about Tank's proposed fiscal 2012 budget. During those discussions, the general feedback that I got from the fiscal courts is that there was some interest in Tank generating more of its revenue through the fare box. There's also interest in the fiscal courts in terms of what peer systems charge for fares and similar services. At that time, if you remember, I stated that Tank staff would conduct a fare analysis beginning in July and report their findings back to the Tank board and back to the fiscal courts. This timeline shows that staff did indeed begin the fare analysis in July. We brought our preliminary recommendations to the board in September. Our intent would be to bring this information out for public comment at the end of September. October would be the month in which the board would take formal action to approve any form of fare increase. If everything is implemented in a proper manner, we would have a fare increase implemented on the street sometime in January of 2012. As you can see, the staff developed 5 goals for this fare analysis. Obviously, an increase in revenue. The second piece is to limit the ridership impact associated with that increase in revenue. The third piece is to comply with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which tells us that we need not have a disproportionate impact on low-income or minority communities. And the fourth and fifth pieces are to improve our transfer process and to simplify the fare structure. In conducting this analysis, we began with a review of our peers. We have a list of peers that were identified in our transit network study back in 2006. These are similar-sized agencies and agencies that operate in similar part of the United States. But we added to that local systems like Louisville, Lexington, Cincinnati, and we also added other river city systems like Memphis and St. Louis. And this chart clearly illustrates the results of this peer analysis. As you can see, it's very straightforward. The 5 different fare types that we're looking at is local bus service, express service, ADA fare, which is our ramp service for disabled individuals, transfers, and our South Bank shuttle. A simple look at the numbers lets you quickly see how we stack up against our peers. You can see on local bus service, Tank's fare is $1.50, and the median of all of our peers is also $1.50. You can see under express, ADA, and transfers that Tank's fare is lower than our peers. And with respect to our South Bank shuttle, with the fare of $1, that fare is actually higher than our peers. As we go through the analysis in the following slides, you'll see that these peer analyses and peer comparisons will drive some of our recommendations. Let's start with local bus service. As you can see in the peer analysis, Tank's local fare matches the peer median of $1.50. What we know about local bus service is that the bulk of Tank passengers use local bus service. It's about 73% of all fixed route ridership. Also, we know that most low-income and minority census blocks in northern Kentucky are served by local bus service. So what we know is that any change in local bus fare would significantly impact ridership and those that most need the service during this economic downturn. With all those considerations in mind, the recommendation at this point is to make no changes to the local base fare or the local monthly pass fare. Moving on to express bus service, we see that there is a difference between Tank's $1.75 express fare and the peer median of $2.10. What we do know about express service is that it is a premium service. The express service provides much faster service in terms of miles per hour and traditionally provides the longest trips in the Tank system. In the discussions with the fiscal courts over the past few months, there was definitely some interest in the folks who are using park and rides paying more for this service. There's another side to the express bus coin, and that is that there are plenty of riders who use the system in a reverse commute way. So these are folks who live in the urban core who are using express buses in the reverse direction to access suburban employment. The recommendation at this point would be to increase the express fare from $1.75 to $2, which would put the fare much more in line with the peers, to increase the associated passes accordingly, but also to not change the cost of the Metro Tank monthly pass. This Metro Tank pass represents the bulk of our reverse commute riders. So those are the folks, again, that are accessing the tank system from the larger Metro system in Cincinnati, and they are transferring to employment in suburban northern Kentucky. When evaluating the South Bank shuttle, we know that Tank's fare of $1 is higher than the peer average of 50 cents. I think that it's impossible to evaluate the shuttle without looking at the significant changes that have been made since November 2010. As you know, we rebranded the system and we created a new route and a new fare. Since January of this year, as I reported at the last fiscal court meeting, the ridership on the South Bank shuttle is up over 44%. With that increased ridership, the route is now a solid performer within the Tank system. We're actually collecting more revenue now at $1 fare than we were a year ago at $1.50 fare. So we think that we have the right price point for this particular service. The other consideration is that the trips on the South Bank shuttle are the shortest trips in the system, relatively speaking, when you consider the other two types of service. So at this point, the recommendation would be to not change the shuttle fare or the shuttle monthly passes. All these recommendations together would result in a three-tiered or a three-zoned system at Tank, where we have express fare at $2, local fare at $1.50, and the shuttle at $1. What that means is that we have three different distinct brands and three different distinct prices for those services. The last thing to consider with respect to our fixed route bus system is transfers. When we think about Tank's transfers, we do not charge folks to transfer from one tank route to another. Some of our peers do and some of our peers don't. What we know within Tank, we've seen recently that there's some challenge and some abuse of our existing transfer system. We feel that offering a quarter charge for a transfer would limit that abuse and would generate a little bit more revenue for the system. What we do know is that most transfers occur on Tank's local bus service. What that means is that any increase in a transfer fee would impact some transit-dependent passengers, and that's a consideration that we have made during this process. Again, at this point, our recommendation would be to add a transfer fee of 25 cents per trip. We can do that in one of two ways, either with a 25-cent cash drop or by forcing the use of a day pass, and we're currently in the works of trying to evaluate the pros and cons of those two options. Moving from the fixed route bus system to Tank's door-to-door bus system, we'll begin with the ADA service, or our ramp service for individuals with disabilities. This is a service that is required by the Federal Transit Administration and the Americans with Disabilities Act. We have to provide this service if we provide fixed route bus service. One of the challenges with this service is that it is extremely expensive to provide. The cost to provide a door-to-door trip exceeds $30 per trip, which is more than 5 times what it costs to provide a trip with the big bus. And again, this service has experienced some serious increase in demand over the last 5 to 10 years. In an effort to keep up with those costs, our recommendation at this point is to increase the ramp fare from $1.75 to $2.50. We would also increase the passes accordingly. This fare is still well within the limits set by FTA and ADA. Not only do they regulate the requirement of the service, they also regulate how much you can charge for the fare. But again, at $2.50, it would be well within the limits that FTA and the ADA would allow. Again, this is still a significant increase to some passengers. A monthly pass, for example, for ramp would go from $62 to $88. So again, an increase in cost for our passengers on the ramp system. The second type of door-to-door service that Tank provides is the Day Tripper, which is our senior service transportation. It is a very limited service that Tank provides. Just to put it in context, it's a service that only operates from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. during the week. The number of trips that are carried on this system is small. It represents less than 6% of our total door-to-door trips, which puts it in much less than 1% of our total trips system-wide. This service is not required by the Federal Transit Administration or the Americans with Disabilities Act. Therefore, when we look at our peers, most of our peers do not provide this type of service. Again, it is just as costly to provide this service as it is our ramp service. It's about $30 a trip. With that in mind, our recommendation is to increase the day tripper fare from $3.25 to $4. This still represents a significant cost savings if someone were to try to access private transportation to make a trip. This is still a community benefit even at $4. What would be the anticipated impact of all of the fare increases proposed in the previous slides? As we know, if we increase the price of a particular good, all things being equal, you're going to have less consumption of that good. So what we know now is that based on our elasticities and the models that we have run, the aforementioned fare increase would decrease ridership by about 1 to 2% system-wide, which would represent about 41,000 trips annually. With respect to revenue, we would generate about 4.5% more revenue through the fare box, which represents about $176,000 a year. Again, this is a targeted fare increase. The bulk of the increases would come from those premium services such as ramp and our express service. The local base fare, which represents the bulk of our ridership and the bulk of our revenue, would not be impacted. With that being said, when we consider the impact on low-income and minority communities, also this fare increase would not have a disproportionate impact there, so we feel that this is a reasonable increase with respect to Title VI. Lastly, this targeted fare increase goes a long way to place tank fares much more in line with Tank's peer transit systems. Quickly reviewing the timeline for our analysis, you can see that now in September is the perfect opportunity for you as members of the fiscal courts to provide any input that you have to this process. If you have questions or comments, please do not hesitate to contact Tank staff or contact the Tank board or participate in the public involvement process that's going to occur in September. Again, in October, the Tank board does have the opportunity to take action on this fare increase proposal. Thank you again for your support of public transportation. Thank you for your time. And again, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to contact me, 859-814-2143. Thank you and have a great day.